Hello and welcome to episode number 186, where I'm sitting down with Ayurvedic doctor Victor Briere and Kundalini Yoga teacher Joe Rich to talk about ending the duality of the masculine and feminine. We talk about old samskaras causing duality and the separation from our spirit, the epidemic of women unable to accept nurturing, the importance of rituals and community, and how we can transcend our wounds and expand our consciousness. So please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, health and wellness, nutrition, fitness, and mindfulness practices, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to help you to connect to each other. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend that you start by listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. Now, if you like the content, please subscribe to the show so the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. I've also set up a new private community away from social media on my new website, Elements Healing and Wellbeing. Now, this community provides a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, and to support each other. And I have many other perks in this community as well, so check it out. I'll put the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab in the menu. I hope you can join us. I'm looking forward to a lot more in-depth connection and conversation over there. And now, here's the show. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I am here in person with Mr. Joe Rich and Victor Briere. Say hello, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Good to be here with Colette right here in our hometown of Valhalla, California.
Yeah, so we have to explain how this happened. In the previous podcast episode, number 180, we chatted, the three of us, Joe, Victor, and myself, about applying consciousness with Kundalini Yoga and Ayurveda. And we talked about a lot in that episode. We're going to discuss it further today because that conversation sparked a lot of interest. So we want to continue that conversation today. But at the end of that conversation, Joe and Victor were like, when are you going to come visit us? And as you know, I'm still studying Ayurveda and I needed to do an internship for my Ayurveda course. The school I was studying with in California was doing it online because of COVID, and that didn't suit me, being 8 hours ahead in Ireland. So while I was editing our previous podcast, I got inspired to ask Victor if he was doing internships, and Victor said,
Oui.
Yes.
Si, yes.
And so this is how it all happened. It all happened very fast. And here I am a few weeks later sitting in Valhalla, California and having a great time. And of course, I feel like there's a reason for all this. And, you know, both Victor and Joe have a lot to share. So I'm excited about this conversation about the ending the duality of masculine and feminine. But before I go any further, let me introduce you to both of them. Victor, you know well, is an Ayurvedic doctor. He's a regular guest on the podcast and works alongside Joe at the Center for Applied Consciousness here in Valhalla, California. Joe is the founder of the Center for Applied Consciousness. He's a Kundalini Yoga teacher and transformational coaching, and also mentors people and businesses in repatterning lifestyle and work style. Joe's goal is to assist people in applying consciousness in everyday life and transforming the love of power to the power of kindness. And I have witnessed that kindness in person.
See, there you go. Did you notice that she didn't say she came here just to be with us? It was.
Oh.
So my ego is a little hurt, but that's okay. I'll get through it.
Well, Well,
just
I
kidding.
did. Okay, that's the start of the kidding now. I'm glad to get it in this podcast episode,
Yes.
I know. Okay, so in our previous episode, we talked about the duality of the masculine and the feminine. We talked about how the typical male energy of power, control, and dominance needs to change. And Joe, you were saying this in the previous episode. It needs to change in order to take on the challenges of our world today.
Yeah.
There needs to be a transition into kindness with a soft-hearted approach, but without losing the essence of masculinity. And we discussed Joe's goal of transforming the love of power into the power of kindness. So today, Victor, I'd like to start with you. You spoke in the previous episode, again, that was number 180, if anybody hasn't listened to that already. You spoke about the healing duality of deep-seated patterns in our autonomic nervous system. An example of this was that where a woman has awareness of the healed, conscious masculine, and it sounds good to her, and she's like, I think I want that. But there's a dissonance as women are actually threatened by an emotional, vulnerable man, and vice versa. Men say they want a powerful woman, but they run into old samskaras of patriarchy inside their body. And so this duality, you said in the previous episode, causes a separation of our spirit. So can you talk to us a little more about autonomic dissonance and these old samskaras that are causing this duality and separation from our spirit?
Definitely. This is one of those topics and concepts in healing that is not talked about enough. Ayurveda, 3 main causes of disease in Ayurveda are time, misuse of the senses, and crimes against wisdom. And this autonomic dissonance falls into the crimes against wisdom category. And that's what sets up this healing duality. So we all walk around and we all have these beliefs and we all have these worldviews, and we got tons of them. And we also have an autonomic nervous system, and that controls a lot of our behavior, especially when we're threatened or under pressure. And so ideally, we have a colloquialism for this is we walk our walk and we talk our talk and we walk our talk, right? Mm-hmm. So when there's dissonance there, it creates a kind of problem for us. It creates a duality. We perceive ourselves, let alone other people perceiving us. We perceive ourselves as someone who believes one thing, but actually when it comes down to it, acts in a different way. And that puts us into duality. We say, well, who am I? Am I this person who I want to be? Am I this? Am I not this? What's going on? Mm-hmm. And then we commit our crimes against wisdom. So we know better, but we do not better.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So to put it simply, autonomic dissonance is when we have a worldview or belief structure that does not align with our autonomic nervous system behavior. I'll give you an example. You already brought one up, but another one never hurts. So let's say I believe that conflict is a part of a healthy relationship. So I walk around and I listen to Esther Perel and I listen to Carolyn Meese and I listen to Brene Brown and I listen to all the people who are at the top right now. And it's like, oh yeah, I need to have conflict if I'm going to have healthy relationships. I shouldn't avoid conflict. And it's all that stuff. And I'm telling my friends that, hey, you need to engage in healthy conflict in your relationships too. But, a month later, one of my friends points out to me, it's like, you say that, but I notice that whenever anyone in the room makes you feel the slightest bit uncomfortable, you get up and walk away. And it's like, oh yeah, no, because I had to go to the bathroom. Because I had to do the dishes. And there's some reason, there's some rationalization. That's autonomic dissonance. The behavior does not align with our belief structure.
Very good. And so if we don't acknowledge this dissonance within us, it's going to be very difficult to apply our desire to heal the part of our system, right? It's going to be, the healing process will be challenged.
You're going to remain in duality, the healing duality. So if you can't get honest about these dissonance factors, then you're never going to be able to make real change because you're never going to be able to confront your own autonomic nervous system and actually train it into something different. You'll just come up with rationalizations and continue avoiding that dissonance.
Right. And we should say that sometimes these belief systems that we have were a defense. Right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Most of the time.
Yeah, so they may have been from childhood, they may have served us well then in childhood as a defense against, whatever our situation was, but now they're still there, ingrained deeply. So we really need to be willing to face our nervous systems and change the way our nervous systems operate.
It's definitely necessary, and it's no easy task, and that's why healing is hard.
Right, exactly. And that's why getting support on your healing journey, which is where we're going to turn to Joe.
Oh,
Joe, here we go.
Yes.
Because we've been talking a lot recently, and I wonder why, about this epidemic of women who can't accept support and nurturing.
Yeah, so on my last podcast with Colette, I offered everybody a free numerology reading. And I was doing these numerology readings, and I noticed that some of the women would actually engage me in conversation. We'd Zoom after I'd done their numerology. And every one of them was saying that one of the biggest things missing in their life was nurturing. And before we all jump to the conclusion it's because they don't have a man or someone in their life that's willing to nurture, I probed into it a little bit with them. And what I have found, like 100%, is that these women do not allow nurturing. They don't look for it. They don't want it. It actually makes them feel uncomfortable. And they are all now starting to experience physical illness, which is Victor's problem. They're starting to experience the physical problems now that come along with having had a life of lack of nurturing. I know one of them, from what I've learned for many years, is breast cancer is definitely an illness that comes when a woman is not nurtured properly. And a lot of times you can even tell which breast. If it's the left breast, she lacked nurturing from the feminine, which could be her own nurturing, self-nurturing. Or if it's in the right breast, they often say that comes from the lack of nurturing from the external or the masculine world. So I brought that to Colette when she got here and said, wow, I have never been made so aware of this in all my years of counseling and everything, because it's 100%. It has hit me in the face, and I really need to even talk to you personally about it, or we can do a podcast around it and invite hundreds and hundreds of other people, because I certainly am looking for enlightenment on this subject from everyone. I don't feel like I have all the answers. It's a big problem. It's a big issue, and we need to tackle it, because it leads to, and Colette can speak to this, it leads to all the other problems. If you're not willing to nurture yourself, if you're not willing to accept nurturing from the external, we're not going to nurture Mother Nature either. And we have seen the destruction of Mother Nature because we've turned her into a profit margin. We've turned her into a source of money instead of loving her and nurturing her. And I think, so all the problems that are facing modern man now is, as weirdly as it may seem, is going to come down to nurturing, I think.
It's fascinating. And when you brought it up, to me, it really resonated, because I've definitely have been one of those women who can't accept nurturing. I've been the strong woman, independent. I've got this, can do it myself for many years. I am learning along this journey with Ayurveda. But we have a lot of women who are burnt out, running on empty, because they're always giving and putting out energy and not accepting that nurturing back in. And if we're at a place now where we need women to rise up and to come into their full power, it's part of our responsibility as women is to let down those boundaries or those walls we put up and accept this nurturing.
Yes. Otherwise, you're just going to teach the world to not do nurturing. I think the men have the masculine's done a terribly great job at that. Right. And it is destroying Mother Nature. So please, we can't repeat the mistakes of the past here. If I'm all about the matriarchy, I'll vote for it and be willing to yield whatever power I have as the white upper middle class male. But if all we do is repeat that history of lack of nurturing, and we just bring anger into the conversation and resentment for what has happened in the past, then we're not going to go anywhere. And so I'm not voting for that. I'm voting for a new day And I hope it's with you women in control, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we talked a lot in the last episode about the divine feminine.
Yeah.
And the divine feminine is the principle of creation. You know, you talked about Mother Nature just there, and that we're not nurturing Mother Nature. And we need to be creating from a feminine position rather than from a position of dominance and power. Right. And we were talking the other day about how you were saying that the feminine needs the support of conscious men who are patriarchal in their essence. And then when the woman or the feminine takes voice and steps up, that we need to know that we're not alone, and we need to know that we're supported. So when the feminine has the courage to step up, that conscious men have the courage to step up and support. So let's talk a little bit about men.
Yeah, so let's do it.
You know, Victor, do you want to take this on, or whichever one of you? Let's talk about when men feel the wound they cannot heal. Actually, Joe, you were talking about this the other day.
Right. Well, maybe we should go all the way back even to the beginning. So, you know, for men, there used to be a ritual that turned the boy from a boy to a man, right? Mm-hmm. And we're back into the ancient or native cultures, right? So I wrote down, I was reading Living an Examined Life by James Hollis this morning, and I wrote this down knowing we were going to have this talk. So there were 7 things that had to happen to a young man, or a young boy, that turned him into a man. So the first thing is that he was removed from the home, and this was not done voluntarily. He didn't raise his hand for that. He was usually just grabbed and taken out into the woods. He was scared. It was threatening. All those things, life-threatening. So that was the first thing. So all of you 20-sums who have failure to launch, or 30-sums or 40-sums that have failure to launch, this would not have happened. You would have been grabbed, and whether you screamed and cried and kicked, mommy would not have come to help you, and the men would have taken you out into the woods, and you would have been forced into this. And that's an important point. He made a point of making that point in the book. I'm not just adding that to it. That was all part of the ritual. Yeah. Because that probably has something to do with the nervous system, I have a feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. So remember, that's different from your conscious aware mind. The autonomic nervous system that encodes patterns of survival largely is on a train track. I mean, it does what it has been taught to do from the past. So at the age of whatever is out with these boys, I'm sure different
15,
from culture to culture,
15.
you know, early to mid teens, their autonomic nervous system is completely trained to the comfort of the mother. Yeah. And so in order to create an evolution, like Joe said, they're not going to raise their hand. And the older men have already been through this, so they know that it's to the child's benefit to break this autonomic nervous system pattern. And I use the word break intentionally. Yeah. Right. Because in our culture these days, there's too much of a like, oh my God, no, that's violent. It's not violent, it's compassion. Right. Because if that doesn't happen, the boy's in serious trouble later in life.
Right. And just to make the correlation again with nature, you know, we see this in nature all the time. I was just looking at the seals down here on the beach the other day, and we're being told how after 4 to 6 weeks, those pups are on their own. Yeah. You know, we see this in nature again and again. And when we're watching those documentaries, sometimes we're like, oh my goodness, the poor little babies. But it's part of nature's cycle. Yeah. So Joe, we'll let you go ahead.
Well, I'll give you another quote from James Hollis. There is scant motive to sacrifice comfort and dependence unless one is required to do so. So I think
there you go.
The word required,
exactly.
meaning you're grabbed and dragged out into the woods. So, okay, number 2 is the ceremony of death. So these boys were actually buried in the ground, or they had to go deep underwater, or there was some kind of ceremony that made you actually face your death. I mean, you were close to death. I'm sure some did die. Yeah. You know, I mean, I don't know, but I bet some did accidentally because they put them right to the edge of death. And so, and you were like one of the main ceremonies that I'm aware of is, you know, you were buried under the ground. Right. So that kind of thing. So then the third ceremony is the ceremony of the rebirth. So if you did survive, here you go. Now you're being rebirthed back in to your life. So what's changed? Well, you've faced your death. You've matured, and now you've taken on a new look at life. The fourth thing is the teachings. So now you're introduced to archetypal stories of creation You're taught the tribal history and the general roles that we're going to play as men now in our tribe, and the history that has gone before us, and all our great leaders or our great kings or whatever the stories are. And then you're taught your survival. So how do you make a living in modern day? But back then, of course, it's hunting and fishing. And the women and the men are also taught about childbearing, but not just giving birth. How are we going to raise our children, right? So the men are taught how to be fathers during this time.
Right.
And so all of that's going on for months and months and months while you're kept separate from the tribe and kept separate from the village. And then you have to go on your ordeal. So I know a common story. I think a lot of people have heard North American native wisdom is, you'd have to go and maybe capture your own eagle, or, at least get the feather, the tail feather or something, which would require you to climb up into a very high tree and raid the nest of the eagle, and you're going to get attacked. So that would be an example of an ordeal, right? But that ordeal usually led you, a vision quest was another thing that I've kind of participated in myself. So anyway, it involved a lot of isolation.
Yeah.
And so for whatever, 3 days and then of course in Christian teaching, you have the story of Jesus going out into the wilderness for 40 days before he comes back and gets himself in trouble.
Right.
So there again, same story.
Yeah, so it is, like you were saying, Victor, this break from the maternal. These rituals were very important. They're not just, some ceremony for the community. It's actually, it's purposefully driven in order to make this break from that maternal bond. And you were talking about that in relation to the nervous system. So what happens now in modern day when men don't go through that period of testing and isolation and rebirth and not having that break from that maternal bond?
A lot of things physiologically, and I'll stick to the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is about picking up threat and safety, but we're talking about threat. So, if we have a highly unbalanced or highly unrealistic about what's really threatening, then we get triggered far more easily. And that has a bunch of health consequences. Psychological consequences are the same, right? So here's an example. Let's say I never break the bonds of the mother. I have clients like this. Absolutely. I see it all the time. And I'm still living with and getting nurtured by mom and things like that. And I never develop any resilience in my own nervous system, then I have a completely skewed and unrealistic perspective about what's actually threatening. So, I have a bad day and to my nervous system, it feels like I'm facing death.
Right.
And so I start getting all whacked out inside. My vital organs aren't functioning properly, so on and so forth. It creates a lot of diseases. But you can't go to a doctor and they're going to say, oh, you have failure to launch disease.
Right.
They're never going to say, maybe a psychologist will, maybe at best. But largely it's not going to happen. And so there's a lack of resilience in the autonomic nervous system. There's a complete unwillingness to face the fact that the challenges that are being put in front of them to heal. So even something as simple as changing the diet.
Right.
It's like, oh no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's gone through that process, it's like, are you kidding me? That's a joke. Of course I can do that. No problem. Right. Yes. I have that much discipline and that much control, I guess I'll use that word, over my nervous system, that those kinds of things aren't a problem.
Yeah.
Someone who never went through that ritual, and it's not just religious, like you said, it's not just this cultural thing, it's an actual physical change, has no issues undergoing those kinds of challenges in order to preserve their own life and health and joy and everything.
Number 6 is prolonged separation.
Okay.
And I think this is really important because I think we misunderstand this. So you have to stay away from the village for a prolonged amount of time. But what happens is that you find comfort in that. And now you say separation is a sign of manhood. And separation means I'm independent. Separation means I'm an individual and I'm strong. And I don't need ... Right.
Right.
I don't want to become dependent again to a woman. I don't want, it might not be the mother's tit anymore, but how about the lovers?
Right.
Right? I don't want to become dependent on anyone. The woman doesn't want, if a woman has achieved this kind of independence, she doesn't want to become dependent on anyone anymore.
Yeah.
That, it can be a real problem because number 7 is return to community. But you return different. You return as a separated adult.
Right.
So you don't return and become codependent.
Right.
You maintain the separated adult, meaning the self-containment that you've achieved.
Yeah.
But you return to community, and now you're functioning, and everything is about community. Now, why am I making a big deal of that? Because you can tell my voice, I'm fired up on this one point. Because if you stay the individual, then I can take profit. I can become a multi-billionaire and let other people starve to death.
Right.
I can extract from the earth things to make me rich and destroy nature.
Yeah.
I can kill millions of animals and call that food, billions of animals and call that food, right?
Yeah.
Without caring about the consequences to what's happening to my planet.
Or your community.
Right. Well, community being now, we have a global community.
Yeah.
We can't think anymore of the village, right?
Right.
What I do affects you in Ireland or affects someone in Israel. And the Israeli-Palestine conflict affects all of us.
Yes.
We recognize that now because of the energy, if nothing else.
Yeah.
But think of the pollution that's going because every time a bomb drops, right?
Right.
Okay, so there you go. You have to return to community and become responsible. So community now becomes more important than the individual I.
Yeah.
And so now all our values have to be derived from that. My actions as a separated adult. But how does that affect the community? And if it affects the community negatively, then I can't do it anymore. So I can no longer extract minerals from the earth to make myself wealthy like an Avatar. The white people in Avatar, which is our favorite movie, by the way. Colette's in mine.
Yes.
We'll have to have a movie night soon. All of those issues, all of the selfishness, all of the egotism, all of the narcissism, all of the male dominance. And that's what we need to get back to because that's where you started.
Yeah.
I dominate a female when I fear her because I'm afraid to become codependent or dependent on her nurturing and her love. Do you see? There it is. Yeah. That's what we need to get away from. We need to end that. And we will if we see the community as more important than the I.
Yes, exactly. So it really is like the hero's journey.
It's the hero's journey.
Right? So you go through the trial, tribulations, you learn the wisdom, and then you come back and share that with the community.
Yes.
So let's talk about disengagement.
Disengagement is the greatest of all betrayals.
Right. So
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown, exactly. Exactly. So if we have, this men that have gone out there have not gone through this separation, now they're in their ego, is about power and dominance, and then they get into a relationship. Who wants to take that?
Well, I think I'll just start by saying that, so if a man doesn't go through this breaking process where his autonomic nervous system changes and actually he becomes self-contained, then when he comes back, or I guess he never left. So when he gets in a relationship with a woman, then he is because he's probably completed this in some partial, weird, warped, modern version of these rituals, right?
Right. Maybe like in a martial arts class or something, right?
A fraternity or something, right? Where it's just all messed up.
Yeah.
So he has this false concept or this ego that he has done this, but in reality he is not. What's that called? Autonomic dissonance, right? I'm independent. I'm a man. I can do this. I can do that. But the autonomic nervous system is like, sorry, check in. No, you're not.
Right.
So he gets in a relationship with a woman, and like what Joe was saying, his greatest fear is becoming codependent with a woman because now that woman's just basically some shadowed form of his mother.
Yes.
Okay. So he's developing an Oedipal complex. I mean, basically.
Yeah.
That's what that myth is about. And that's going to cause all sorts of problems for the woman and the man, both. And he's never going to experience his authentic self as a male in the world. And then she doesn't get the benefit of that. And not only that, that fear is going to drive the ego to be threatened all the time.
Right.
By the woman.
Right.
By the one he's saying, I love you.
Yes.
Right. Well, that's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then how...
So where do we find solutions?
Where does this lead to? We talked about the disengagement that you talked about. Disengagement is the greatest of all betrayals. So you have this relationship between a man and woman in this case, and the man is threatened.
Right.
Right. And the woman feels that energy.
Right. Everybody's disengaging to protect the I.
Yeah.
And they're not moving to the communal we.
Right.
Right. So everybody's feeling that. Because everybody has the urge to merge.
Yeah.
We all want to connect. And because it's safety. I mean, it's survival.
Yes.
The human animal
Yeah.
is based on grouping.
Social beings.
Yeah, we're social beings. I mean, that's, some animals are not, like, the big leopards and the cats, the big wild cats. They're not. But we are.
Yeah.
And so connecting and the urge to merge or any of those kind of expressions, and you run into it when you're in your yoga classes, that is fundamental for us. So when we feel people that we are dependent, that, emotionally we want to involve ourselves with, that we trust, that we have our trust and we have our vulnerability, and we feel them disengaging, that's a big threat.
Yeah.
It's a threat that actually feels like it could cause death.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we panic. We start, if you're talking about marriage, I mean, whoever's feeling it the most, or maybe both, are going to start looking for somebody to partner with. And that's what leads to affairs and stuff. Then everybody blows up on the affair. But how at the 10 years of disengagement that maybe both were participating. I'm not pointing fingers here.
Sure. But for example, if the woman is triggered by the man's, this energy coming from the man, of this threatening energy, and the woman shuts down,
absolutely,
and the man's needs then are not met,
right,
then he's going to seek outside of that relationship.
Yeah, but he needs to be responsible for is that he threatened.
Absolutely.
That's the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be looked at.
They're not understanding that when they're in this dynamic.
Great. Everybody's in denial.
Denial, and they're just looking at, this is what Ayurveda guards against eternally, is don't just keep looking at the symptom over and over and over again.
Exactly.
The affair is the symptom. Yeah. And I think Esther Perel would agree with me, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So the affair is a symptom, or the whatever is a symptom, right?
Yeah.
Because someone might be having affair fantasies but never acted out.
Right.
That's all the symptom. The cause is the stuff we're trying to talk about.
James Hollis in his book talks about when he's doing his weekend seminar-y kind of things with a group of people, or retreats.
Yeah.
And we'll do this on our retreat. We'll do some of this stuff. He says one of the questions I ask to everyone is, do you feel like and these are older people. These are people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Well, what do you feel like you need to grow up? He said, without hesitation, people start writing immediately, within seconds, right? So here we are at age 50-something.
Yeah.
And we still feel like we need to grow up.
Right.
Right? So he says this is the deal. This is the moment we say, I am accountable and I am responsible, I have to deal with this, is the day we grow up.
Wow.
Okay, so it's what Victor just said. We can no longer be in denial.
Yeah.
The day we say, I see it, I did it, and now I'm going to deal with the consequences of that, right?
Yeah.
And then Brené Brown and her whole issue with trust, she talks about braving.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, braving the
wilderness.
And
so A is the accountability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Okay. So can you explain to people who James Hollis is? James
Hollis is a therapist who does Jungian therapy on people. You can look him up. He's got tons of books.
Yeah, great.
I've read 3. We're going to, talk to him further. I'm going to keep learning from him. He does weekend retreats and things. And so he's great. But, they're all great.
Yes.
The cool thing is that reading all of these people of late, they all blend together. I've
Absolutely.
yet to see anywhere where they disagree.
That's the wonderful thing. They're
Yeah.
saying it in different ways.
Yes.
And you sent me another quote, which I have here, which is
Good.
perfect right now, from James Hollis again. The capacity for growth depends on one's ability to internalize and to take personal responsibility.
Same. Yeah.
If we forever see our life as a problem caused by others, a problem to be solved, then no change will occur.
There you go.
So, Victor, you mentioned that of course, taking responsibility and our toxicity is in our ANS, our autonomic nervous system, and that's our work.
Yeah. So, if you ever hear yourself saying, "You made me feel," just stop, because that's the opposite of taking responsibility for your own reactions to other people's actions. So I teach a course on Ayurveda and the vagus nerve, and there is an exercise we just did, which I thought was very illuminating. So, this word's flying around, toxic masculinity, all the time. It's all over the place now. And so it did a little exercise where I had everyone in the class. I wrote toxic masculinity on the top of a piece of paper and said, okay, list everything that comes to mind when you think toxic masculinity. And, there were like 15 things on the list or something like that, right? So here were 3 that were just kind of encompassing: overbearing, aggressive, and mansplaining.
Yes.
That was the 3rd one. Okay. So then I turned the page and I said, all right. And I wrote toxic femininity on the top, which conveniently is a term we do not hear circulating in our culture.
Yes.
As though it doesn't exist. So there were actually, it turned out that there were about the same amount of items on the list. And the 3 of them were insecure, weak, and emotional. Okay. So now those seem pretty polar, those lists, right?
Yeah.
Overbearing, aggressive, mansplaining, and insecure, weak, emotional.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I went back to the toxic masculine list and I pointed at overbearing and I said, can a woman be overbearing? Are women overbearing? Everyone said, yes. Said, can women be overly aggressive? Yes. Can women do femsplaining? Yes.
Right.
And then we went to the toxic feminine list and said, can men be insecure? Yes. Can men be weak? Yes. And can men be emotional? Yes. And so the whole point of that was that this whole toxic masculine, toxic feminine thing, of course, yes, we can get into cultural patterns, but that's what they are. They're not inherently masculine and they're not inherently feminine.
Right.
They're toxic autonomic nervous system patterns that either gender can adopt based on their survival strategies.
Right.
And you're off to the races.
Right.
So, and that toxicity is contextual to whether it helped you then and now. So that's the quote you like to say. The walls that kept me safe.
The walls that kept me safe that I built as a child to keep me safe are now the walls that as an adult imprisoned me.
Yeah. So maybe a young man needed to be weak and insecure because if he acted confident and brave, his father would abuse him, right?
Threatened by it.
Okay, so it was a good thing. That was a good survival strategy
Right.
for that. But now, as a 28-year-old man, that man needs to drop that pattern in his autonomic nervous system. He needs to break it and redo his autonomic nervous system so that he can then go into community and give the community what it needs.
Yes.
So it's only toxic based on the context. And if all the listeners are Ayurvedic people, same rule in Ayurveda, right? Everything in nature is medicinal or toxic depending on its context.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, and of course we should mention here that if we all have wounds, and we talked about this yesterday, Joe. Can you talk on that? That the importance of, that we're not saying to forget about wounds.
No, we're not at all. We have to transcend it. We have to. Here, I'll read you a quickie here. The cure we seek is not in resolution of a conflict, but in transcendence of its debilitating opposites. That which touches us most deeply and leads us into radical encounter with that which is larger. So in other words, yes, we've all been wounded to some degree or another, but that has to drive us into our introspection. And we have to find our life that is larger, which is connection. I hate to use anything that sounds like religion because we're certainly not pushing that here. But the soul or consciousness or the universe or my expanded self or whatever,
Right.
whatever things.
Yeah.
Any of those things is what we're talking about here. And to use the wound, the abuse maybe in your childhood, and use that to drive you deeper into yourself and find the greater, bigger you so that you can transcend the wound, because you are not going to probably heal that wound.
Right.
And that's an important thing I think, to realize.
Yeah. The acceptance of that wound.
Yeah. I think if we quit trying to heal our wounds and just go deeper into our psyches, our souls, expand our consciousness, and just try to transcend the wound. Until we can find that which links us to that which transcends us. In whatever arena we find it, we will be torn apart by our opposites. Until then, our conflicts, or you could say, any wounding, a conflict and wounding is the same thing. Any conflict has brought us only suffering without meaning. And I think that's really important. If you have suffered some terrible wound, abuse in the child, we're learning today how much sexual abuse there's been, right?
Yeah.
To men and women.
Yeah.
I don't think we should just say women anymore.
No, not at all.
We're starting to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's been the wound, or any other kind of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, whatever, I would just encourage everybody to bring that to consciousness and turn it into, suffering, but we have to find the meaning behind it. And that meaning can expand us and actually make what once was horrible into something that's more, tolerable. I don't want to go beyond that. I don't want to turn it into a great thing.
Right. But I agree. It's transcending that wound, because a lot of times people, if they're going to therapy, you're going back into that traumatic experience and you're reliving it, and your whole body's feeling that again, right, Victor? The nervous system is activating and you're reliving that trauma. So it's actually causing damage again. And did you want to speak on that?
Just that I've had the experience quite a bit in the clinic over the years that I finally caught on to, where people kept saying, I want to feel like I used to feel. I want to this and that, right? And, I was a bit slow on the uptake. It took me a few years, but eventually I was like, wait a second, that's a big problem. These people are never going to feel the way they used to feel, especially when you've had some horrific, horrible, awful disease that's chronic and stuff like that, right? Yeah. But what I've found is much more successful of an attitude for someone to adopt is to say, okay, forget what I was. I'm going to evolve into something completely new, or, new based off what I am now.
Right.
And people who do that, who can really adopt that and don't try to cling to what was, heal a lot better.
Yes.
Yes. And they do a version of what Joe was just saying in that quote. They start to transcend this whole, I'm this now and I was this 2 years ago and I want to go back.
Right.
Yeah, don't do that.
Right.
And it's not possible. You can't.
Exactly.
So don't even try.
So this is the quote that Joe was just referencing from James Hollis. And he says, the greatest and most important problems of life are all in a certain sense insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. This outgrowing, as he formally calls it, on further experience, was seen to consist in a new level of consciousness. Some higher or wider interest arose on the person's horizon, and through this widening of view, the insoluble problem lost its urgency. It was not solved logically in its own terms, but faded out when confronted with a new and stronger life tendency. And I love that. And I feel that's, Ayurveda's role is the overarching, theme of Ayurveda is to bring you into balance. So you're no longer draining energy on old wounds or illness, and so you have a greater awareness, a greater consciousness, a wider viewpoint from which to see things. You're not in this, myopic view of just your problems. Right. Now you have a greater consciousness. Of course, Kundalini Yoga as well and other forms of yoga can help you on this path. So let's transition now to talking about how people who are resonating with this can start on that path, can start on this journey of transcending those wounds, of bringing themselves into balance, so they can have this greater conscious, more awareness to enter. And from that standpoint, then continue on their life path.
I've found that it's best to, I think, walk an Ayurvedic and yogic path simultaneously. And what do you think about that?
I think how clear is the intention and everything. I think everything can help. And I think you need it all. I really do. Like, I've been teaching Kundalini Yoga for 22 years. So please, I have great respect for yoga in general. I don't care if it's Kundalini or not. But I think that you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think we all want to do that. And, Ayurveda can probably speak to that. But I think people, they'll click into, I'll do yoga and meditation. And so they spend hours and hours doing yoga and meditation, but the relationships don't really get any better.
Right.
Things don't get any better. And then they get disappointed and disillusioned after a while, and they quit doing that, and they do the shopping thing.
Spiritual shopping.
Shopping.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's forever your mind will create a reason why it's not working anymore or something like that.
Right. Well, the relationships aren't working anymore. And then we start pointing outward, it's your fault.
Yeah. Basically, when it's really what James Hollis is saying is, you need a much wider perspective because you're getting myopic, like you were saying, Colette. And that's a big problem, getting too myopic. It's like, protein. And it's like, whoa, your problem has nothing to do with protein.
Yeah.
Or it's one tiny piece in the puzzle and you've got about 1,000 pieces to assemble.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you need friends. I think, you need the kitchen table, the long talks in the morning over
Amen.
Tea and kitchen. Community. Some
Nurturing.
Wisdom of elders, which, these days, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I get it. Young people don't trust older people, and the way our older politicians act, I don't blame them. There's a lack of wisdom these days, but I think you can find it. I think if you really are seeking it out, you can find the old lady maybe who lives next door or something, and you go over for a cup of tea if you're a young woman and sit down and let her share her wisdom with you. Maybe it won't be found on the internet. Maybe that's a tough challenge for the young people today. They want everything on Google. But I think you have to engage in the human relationships. I think there's a value in just that alone, that engagement. There's a trust issue that has to be resolved there, and there is a vulnerability issue. And going to someone else and talking and being in the presence helps bring about you facing your trust and vulnerability issues. I think all of that stuff is going to have to get dealt with if we're going to do some real healing.
Yeah.
And I think it's everybody's responsibility. I don't think it's just a man and a woman's, whatever you want to point your finger at. I think you better point the finger inward and then find whatever practices. And yoga and meditation certainly is critical in that. But I also think you better find, what do we call our lovers? The
critical lovers?
The critical lovers in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And those critical lovers, I think, come in many forms. Just so the listeners know, a critical lover is someone who cares about you and will tell you the truth about what's going on.
Right.
Or at least close to it.
Yeah.
As best as they're able to.
Call you out.
Yeah, it's that type of relationship. And you need that relationship in probably maybe if you can get 2 of them, that would be great. Because they're doing that because they care about you, and they're not walking on eggshells around your reactions and feelings, and they don't need you to like them.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a tall order for someone to be someone else's critical lover. But it's a necessary role, and it is a dying breed right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we were talking the other day about the selfish motivation to help people heal.
Yes. Well, we were realizing that, the person who's the critical lover, or, whatever you want to perceive as the one who's dishing out the wisdom or whatever. A lot of times it's the older person, and please don't set them up as an authority figure. That happens to me all the time because I'm old. But anyway, people say, well, why are you willing to sacrifice your time or energy to help me? And it's like, no, wait a second. Don't put a halo on my head. That's a very selfish desire, because if your consciousness expands, I get to live in a world with expanded consciousness. So if you're personally in my little world, more my micro world, my smaller community, well, certainly I benefit a great deal, I mean, come on, who doesn't want to hang out with people who are of higher consciousness? And so therefore, that's another motivation for me to push myself so that you can hang out with me in a higher consciousness. But also in the larger, I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could just simply say, hey, we've got an environmental crisis here, and 100% of the world jumped on it and started solving the problem.
Right, exactly.
Well, that'd be everybody in their higher consciousness. So it's a totally selfish desire. It's, I give of my time and energy because I want to live in a better world. And, if I can help you achieve consciousness and you help me, then we all get to live in a better world. So
it's a beautiful thing. And you get to use your skill set as a nurturer.
Yes. Well,
to nurture people.
As best as you can. Some people just resist and resist.
Some people.
Yes. That's been the topic since I've been here, is me accepting nurturing. I'm getting better.
You are?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. That's her worldview.
But it is, a very important topic. So think about where you're receiving nurturing. We have, a high percentage of women listen to this podcast. And so think about, all that you're giving out, but what are you receiving in? And are you able to receive?
And again, this is what I ran into. If I am, I'm a Cancer male. Let's get into astrology for a second here. Victor's an astrologer, so let's say I am a Cancer male. So I like to nurture. It's in my nature to nurture. So if I walk up to you and say, hey, can I nurture you? And you say no, then that prevents me from being able to do what I want to do. So please, again, your willingness to accept nurturing might be doing the nurturer a favor. So please don't say no. And every woman I've gotten a chance to talk to of late that has come through this, when I say to them, but don't you really want to be nurtured? They all say yes. They all do want to be nurtured. They just don't want it to lead to some kind of dependency or dominance or submission or giving up of the self. Or they just don't want you to add anything to that. Just nurture me and thumbs are up.
Yes, right. Definitely. That's what we need more of. Okay, as we finish up here, you and Victor have some offers of nurturing.
Go ahead.
Okay, my offer of nurturing is anyone who's listening to this who wants to contact me, and I'll give a free 15-minute Prakriti reading, Ayurvedic Prakriti reading, what your core constitution is and the very basics of that. And that's how I can help right now.
And I will be happy to do your numerology for free. And I didn't do this last time. Please send your birthday, month, and year. I need that. I don't need your time. I don't need your place. It's not astrology. It's numerology. So just send me those three things, and I will email you back a little general reading, that just kind of hits on the main topics. If you want to go into it further, you can either email me back questions, and that'll give me some direction and some
wonderful.
That, or we can even set up a Zoom.
Okay, perfect. And you can do that by
chat
email.
It up.
Okay.
And create community.
Yes.
Colette's community.
Colette's conscious community.
Yes.
3 C's.
The 3 C's. Come on.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's go with that.
Yeah,
the 3 C's.
So where do people contact you and Joe for that information?
You could do either one. You can or both. The numerology Prakriti. You could contact reception at Ayurveda.com. So II is short for International Institute of Ayurveda.
So that's for the numerology.
And the Prakriti.
Great. And I am going to put that in the show notes. And talking about Ayurveda.
Yeah, International Institute of Ayurveda is a new school, Ayurvedic school. It's California state certified, and it will shortly be approved by NAMA completely.
Wonderful.
So we're going to be starting our Ayurvedic Practitioner Certified Professional course January 2022. And also, we are launching our second round of the Ayurveda and the Vagus Nerve course, which is seriously a super cool course.
Yes.
Also January of 2022.
Great.
So anyone who's interested in Ayurvedic education, just reach out and I'll talk to you.
To that same reception at iiayurveda.com.
Yep, that's the catch-all email.
Perfect. And you mentioned earlier a retreat in Montepulciano.
Yes, the three of us, including Colette, will be in Montepulciano next year. What are we talking? Maybe May?
I think May it was.
May, June, somewhere in there. A retreat. And all of this and way more will be discussed and hammered, and we'll eat together. I'm a vegan chef.
Amazing chef.
Amazing chef. And I will cook for you and I will nurture you and love you, but we will have great conversation. And I would like some feedback from you guys right now, because that'll help set up what we talk about, because we have way too much to talk about than the time we're going to allow for it. If we even do a week, that will not even come close. So somebody's going to have to narrow us down. And your viewers would be great people to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, you can certainly send your suggestions to info@elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and I'll put that link in the show notes. And we're going to continue to do more podcasts together, because obviously there's a reason that I'm here with my microphone.
Besides the fact that she loves me so much.
That's because, yes, I love both Joe and Victor.
Thank you.
And, that goes without saying, though. And the lovely vegan food.
I made you say it.
Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Such valuable information. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Send us feedback. And until next time, take good care of yourselves and look into, where are you receiving nurturing? Are you allowing it in? Say goodbye.
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 God bless you. We love you.
Talk to y'all soon.
Ciao for now.
Ciao.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Joe and Victor, and please check out the show notes for all the links we mentioned and those wonderful offers of nurturing from Joe, the free numerology reading by email, and Victor's free 15-minute Prakriti call. Also, the Vagus Nerve course and the Ayurvedic Practitioner course, both starting January 2022 with the International Institute of Ayurveda. Please send us your feedback to myself at info@elementshealingandwellbeing.com. And if you want to check out my online services, just visit elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you think that this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them so we can spread this wisdom. And don't forget to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you, and you can rate and review the podcasts wherever you listen to your podcast. I would truly appreciate it. Don't forget, if you want to continue the conversation, check out the Private Elements of Ayurveda community. I'll put that link in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. Take good care of yourself, be well, and until next time, slán go fóill. Bye for now.